Well, there's a lot of ways to approach this topic. So kind of dive in the middle and then spread out both ways. But whenever you got a question, just raise your hand. Jesus called 12 apostles and sent them forth on Pentecost to spread the good news. And they started out in Jerusalem and then went to Antioch and all over the place. And then they ordained, the word apostle means those who are sent, that's those 12. And then when they died, then their successor would have been ordained by one of the other apostles. Could talk about apostolic succession. We're called overseers, and that's what the word bishop means, is overseer. And you can think of it in terms of, the bishop's job is to kind of oversee the working of the diocese, or he has to overlook a lot of things. So every bishop is in apostolic succession, meaning I was ordained a bishop by someone who was ordained a bishop by someone who was ordained a bishop, all the way back 2,000 years to the 12 apostles.
Tap them up.
There you go. Okay, and so that's the short term where the bishops come from. The bishops from the early church, you've got designated persons to assist them in ordained ministry. And there were presbyters and deacons. And one of the main roles of a presbyter early on was to be the leader of worship at Mass. And so we commonly call them a priest, because the priest is the leader of worship at Mass. Or the priest offers the sacrifice at an altar. But the title you'll find in the New Testament is presbyter, which means elder. And one reason why the New Testament doesn't use the word priest yet for the presbyters is that the temple in Jerusalem was still in operation, and they had priests there. And so those were the priests during the first couple. I mean, they weren't Christian priests, but they're the people that went by the name of priest. And then once the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, of course, it became clear that, of course, Christ is the new temple, and the presbyters, the sacrifice of the Mass is the sacrifice, Christian sacrifice, instead of going to the temple. And so the title priest got attached to the presbyters, because that was a function that they exercised. And then deacons were also ordained. You see the Acts of the Apostles set aside to be ministers of charity. Yes?
Okay, I know this sounds crazy. So my husband showed me kind of the chart of how like all the popes go down. So do you have one of those charts?
Yeah, mine goes back to the 1600s because they didn't really keep records of earlier than that. The principal dioceses like Rome was all the way, they got the list all the way back.
Yeah. Okay.
But my pedigree isn't quite that good. but it's been a constant tradition of the church for bishops to be ordained by other bishops, and so it goes all the way back. Yes?
So do you know what apostle you can trace yourself back to, or is that because yours only goes to the 1600s you can't?
Well, probably all of them eventually, because, since there were different bishops involved in the deal, you'd think that along the way that most of them have been included. But any specific one, no.
Okay.
No specific one. So, priests are given faculties by the bishop, meaning authorization to exercise their ministry. So if you got a renegade priest, the bishop doesn't give them faculties, and they can't function. Okay, so it's a priest it's an extension of the ministry of the bishop. Okay. And yes.
So basically what you're talking about is like the difference between validity and licitity. Like,
yes,
you
you're right.
have a valid priest, but they're acting illicitly.
Yes, that's right.
Is that kind of around the same realm as, say, for example, the Society of St. Pius X?
Yes,
So they're valid but not licit?
that's right.
Okay.
Okay. So, you
Can't put that name.
You can the ordination changes the priest. It's an ontological change, a change of the priest, and that's permanent. Okay, once you're, just like baptism, once you're baptized, you're permanently a Christian. You might turn your back on it, you might be a bad Christian, you might be headed for hell, but you're still a Christian. Okay? And so ordination does the same thing in the sense of it changes the person, it's permanent. But a priest who is removed from ministry, there is a procedure for reducing someone to the lay state, Cardinal McCarrick, for instance. But that would be punishment for something, rather than simply having gone off the rails, So if a priest does not have faculties, and it could be they just moved here and from some other place, and they didn't let me know they were in town, and so they don't have faculties to exercise it here. So it's and if they were to go do something, it would be valid because they really are a real priest, but it's not permitted. It's not licit. So they're in trouble with God, but they're still valid. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. Yes.
Does a visiting priest have to get those faculties? Like if he's coming here to do a wedding, does he have to contact your office and say?
That's right, he does.
Okay.
And he has to get delegation. I can make it as complicated as you like. They have to get delegation from the local church to do it, plus permission from me, from the diocese, and to exercise ministry. And of course, in terms of the diocese, now, in today's church, it's also the safe environment check and background check, because we don't want somebody to come in that's going to commit a crime, going to abuse somebody. Okay, so that's more recent, but all along we still have to get permission. So those are the three orders, bishop, and then priest, presbyter, and deacon. And presbyter and deacon both exercise their ministry in virtue of the local bishop. Now, the church is divided territorially into dioceses, and each diocese has an ordinary, who is the bishop, who is the bishop in charge of that diocese. We say ordinary because because some dioceses might have an auxiliary bishop or a retired bishop or something like that, and they're not in charge of the diocese, but they are a bishop. Some really large dioceses might have multiple bishops to do confirmations and things like that, but the auxiliaries or helping bishops are not in charge of the diocese. Okay, so every diocese has got an ordinary in charge of the diocese. And the dioceses are grouped into provinces. And one of the dioceses in the province is designated as the metropolitan see, which means and that's where the archbishop is of the province. So in our province, it's the states of Oklahoma and Arkansas. It's one province. And the archbishop of Oklahoma City is the metropolitan, and then the bishops of Tulsa and Little Rock are the suffragan dioceses. Okay? Meaning we are, it's not exactly subordinate, but we are grouped within the province under the leadership of the metropolitan. Yes?
Okay, sorry. A little stupid question. So you said the archdiocese in Oklahoma. So you're like, is there a bishop that's over you?
Well, he's not over me, really. The role of the archbishop is he's responsible for gathering the other bishops in the province for meetings. He's responsible for conveying the input from those meetings to Rome. He's responsible, if there's a complaint against me, it's brought to him. Okay? If there's a complaint against him, it's brought to me, because I am the senior suffragan. So of Tulsa and Little Rock, I've been bishop longer than the guy in Tulsa. And so I'm the senior suffragan. So it's a procedure of handling complaints. The metropolitan will typically host the appeals court, the tribunal of second instance. So if anybody's had an annulment and then there was an appeal to be made, then it goes to his diocese hosts that. But he's not over me. So I'm completely free in how I shepherd the church in Arkansas. If somebody writes a letter complaining because of something I said, he'll just send it back to me and say, okay, you need to deal with that person. You know? In other words, he's not over, I don't have to answer to him or anything like that. It's not like a military structure or anything like that. Yeah.
Cardinals, where does that come in
Okay, I'll get to
with
that.
us?
Cardinals are men chosen to be as special advisors to the Pope. They have a role in electing the Pope. Almost always, they are bishops, but not always. I think there are a couple of cardinals that Pope Francis has named that are priests, maybe even a layperson. It can be a lay. You just have to be a Catholic male to be a cardinal.
They're like an application.
No, Larry.
At one time, most of the cardinals were from Italy, because to get for the elections, you know, you had to do that in a timely way. You know, and then they tended to be from the most prominent dioceses in the world. Pope Francis, he's very interested in getting the periphery involved as well. And so Los Angeles, the bishop in Los Angeles, Hughes Diocese, is not a cardinal. But the bishop in some remote location a bishop in a small diocese in Guatemala is a cardinal. And so so there's no, cardinals are not in charge of any of, it's not like a hierarchical role, it's simply, they've got a role as counselor to the Pope.
So Arkansas, we technically, we have you, but not necessarily been a cardinal over.
You have no cardinal over you. You are free.
What is the importance of this order in the Catholic Church, where you have the Pope, the cardinals, the bishop, the priest? In Baptist, you know, we just have a preacher in the church. But what's the importance, the significance of it, I guess?
Well, there are a couple parts of it. One of them is, it seems to be that's what Jesus' will was, you know, for founding the church. That's why he had the 12 apostles, you know. But secondly, you know, order and organization are helpful. And, you know, over the course of 2,000 years, anything that can go wrong has gone wrong. It's happened. And so having a structure helps to deal with things that come up that, in a way that if you don't have that structure, you know, there can be chaos, really. And so the structure has been put in place in order to create order and to mitigate problems, I guess you could say. It's evolved in the life of the church. So the way that leadership functioned in the first century was different than in the third century. When there was once the church became able to go freely, like the church, once we became free, we organized ourselves into dioceses. The church did. Before that, there were no dioceses. You know, and so the boundaries of, well, one bishop's responsibility ended and the next one's began, it wasn't clear. You know, there weren't like divisions like that. So it's organized. Yes?
Okay, so if a bishop becomes a cardinal, are they always a cardinal or can that change?
No, they remain a cardinal.
They remain a cardinal, and do they remain a bishop?
Yes,
Okay.
they remain a bishop. And of course it could be transferred, like could be a bishop and then you transfer to become a metropolitan somewhere else, be an archbishop, you know. That could occur. But the cardinal is not a higher rank. It's simply it's a responsibility that these particular persons have.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, what's the difference between a diocese and an archdiocese?
An archdiocese has got an archbishop. A diocese has just got a simple bishop. And so, like in the province, you know, of our province,
Yeah.
the archdiocese of Oklahoma City is the western 2/3 of Oklahoma.
So it's
And it's the diocese where the archbishop is, and so that's why it's called archdiocese.
So is it because it's bigger?
No, and in fact, usually the archdiocese is the oldest or the largest diocese in the province.
Okay.
And in our case, Little Rock is both the largest diocese and the oldest diocese in the province.
But it's not the archdiocese?
It's not. And there are two possible reasons. One is Oklahoma's the bigger state. It's got 2 dioceses. But the more intriguing one is that in Vatican I, there were 2 bishops in the world who voted against papal infallibility. And one was the Bishop of Little Rock. And so, and he said he believed the doctrine. It was simply being in the Deep South in 1870, going around talking about papal infallibility was not going to win very many converts. And so pastorally, he felt it was not an opportune time to make that. Yes?
So you oversee all the priests in all of Arkansas and Texas
Yes.
churches? Okay, so something that's new to me in the Catholic Church is how priests are moved around from place to place. So you make all those decisions?
I do.
Oh, wow.
But I consult.
Yeah.
The Diocese of Little Rock has got 130 churches, okay? And about 70 some odd of them are what we call parishes. And then the remainder are mission churches. And